Everyone. Okay. So my name is Kelly, as they said, and before I go on, I would like to thank you all for welcoming us to your school. Thank you for giving us the chance to be able to debate with all of you. Now, today's motion suggests that the ICC has done more harm than good to Africa. Now, before I move on to my arguments, I would just like to give a small background about what the ICC is and why it was established and founded in the first place. The International Criminal Court, which is the ICC, investigates and, where warranted, tries individuals charged with the gravest crimes of concern to the international community. Crimes such as genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. The ICC has four main aims, which are to ensure the worst perpetrators are held accountable for their crimes, to serve as a court of last resort that can investigate, to persecute and punish the perpetrators of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, and to assist the national judiciaries in the investigation and prosecution of perpetrators with the aim to allow states to first investigate and prosecute, help to promote peace and security, deterring the potential perpetrators. We as the affirmative side today will defend that yes, indeed, ICC has done more harm than good, simply because we believe that the ICC has failed to deliver on its promise of justice, and throughout its history, it has only successfully tried 2 cases, given all the huge resources that it has. On to my first argument. The ICC has completely failed to deliver on its promise of justice. The International Criminal Court seeks justice, believing that all humans have specific rights. When criminals threaten these liberties and cause chaos to civilians, he or she deserves prosecution and must be stopped. While the ICC describes its efforts to tackle the punishment, it has failed at establishing restorative justice, which is a form of justice that brings about peace after criminal persecution. Instead, the ICC practices retributive justice, whereby it focuses on only capturing and locking up the criminal. It is important to persecute perpetrators of major international crimes to prevent them from continuing their crimes, but it is equally important to practice restorative justice to protect victimized civilians to attain peace. The court clarifies that it solemnly plays a judicial role, but no organization has committed to playing the equally important political and peacekeeping role. Likewise, the ICC needs to work cooperatively with the UN Security Council to provide peacekeeping alongside an investigation. Humanitarian aid would be pointless when no one can persecute a cruel and cooperative leader who's causing violence and oppressing civilians. As shown in Uganda, a Rome Statute has allowed Joseph Kony to continue violating international humanitarian law and universal human rights. In the past, autocratic leaders such as Idi Amin of Uganda and Jean Bedel Bokassa of the Central African Republic violated the rights of their citizens, but there was little intervention from the other African countries, or even the Organization of the African Unity. Although Amin and Bokassa were extremes, other leaders in Africa were responsible for the gross violation of rights, such violations are continuing today, especially during civil wars and periods of political instability. Therefore, the International Criminal Court, ICC, could have played a pivotal role ensuring that those involved in crimes against humanity in Africa are brought to account. But unfortunately, the ICC has failed to deliver on its promise of justice by not persecuting all these leaders and letting them free to continue their actions, yet it was seen as one of the things that could have saved Africans from the unfair treatment practiced by their own leaders. Our second argument is that the ICC has only convicted 2 cases successfully. Impunity for the worst crimes is in desperate need. An ICC has been seized, and yet the ICC is doing nothing in regard. With its huge budget, the ICC has only been able to try 2 cases. For this reason, we believe that the ICC has completely failed to deliver on its promise of justice and has done more harm to Africa because it has failed to successfully convict the leaders that were responsible for human rights and human crimes. Thank you.
Can we okay? Yes. All right, my opponent's ready? Chip, you ready? Audience ready? Let's begin. Since this is our first speech, Chip and I really want to thank all of you for coming out today to participate in this debate. Dr. Voth for your help, Grace for moderating, and for our team for coming out here. We really appreciate all you're doing, the long distance you've come, and the time you're taking out of your tour to spend time with us. We really appreciate it, and we know this debate's going to be really good. So with that, I want to set up some framework, talk about where we want this debate to go, what we want you to consider, and give you some points. What we have here is 2 speeches where you can set up points, and then 2 where we can refute them. So in this first case, I'm going to be bringing up some new points, talk a little bit about what they've said, but really bring up some new ideas that we want you to consider for the negation side, showing that the International Criminal Court, in fact, has been good for Africa. We want to show why it's actually a good thing. So first, talking about some framework. I like the way our opponents have set this up. They've defined the International Criminal Court very well. One thing we want to talk about is how you want to weigh this. How will you decide? If you think that, on balance, that the International Criminal Court has done more harm than good, you'll vote for the affirmative. Otherwise, you can vote for the negative today. We're going to try to put forth a strong case to show you why to do that. So first of all, we're going to talk about their first contention of failed justice. They say that justice has not been delivered. However, my partner mentioned in cross-sex is that the only thing we're going for here, only restorative justice. And that's not actually the case here. We're going to extend on this more later, but we're not talking about simply restorative justice, kind of scraping it together at the end, of making right for this. That's not all the court's trying to do here, and that's not the sole focus of the court. So looking at delivering their promise, they're actually hitting a lot more wider areas, and that deserves some credit. So let's look at that a little bit more, talking about justice. My opponents mentioned that the purpose was to deal with genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. We can see them taking on cases in all of those forms. They're actually looking into all of these, and they're actually trying to do something really good about it, and that has been seen in insolvency. Moving on to subpoint B under that of commitments to justice, many African countries actually do support this endeavor. They really support what the court's trying to do. And the reason they throw their support behind it is because of this justice idea. For them, it means that they're restoring their commitment, their accountability toward justice. It's more to them than just taking on cases. It's something of solidarity, the fact that they want to pursue justice in their own continents. Moving under that is human rights. We all recognize that crimes against humanity, genocide, are pretty egregious human rights violations. And that's why we actually need the court. We need an international level to actually deal with those, because it's hard for one government to take that on by themselves, especially if that's happening between different countries, between countries on a continent where they can't just have control over the other one. You need a bigger body to do that. Now, take African Judge Akub from South Africa. He says that some violations are so egregious that even heads of states cannot be free from it. So we recognize that it's going to be really hard to take those heads of states down, and that you need something bigger than that to keep them accountable. And the way to do that is actually through the International Criminal Court. So moving down a little bit more, they mentioned there have only been 2 cases. Only 2 cases have been solved, but there's more to it than that. It's not like they've been in operation since 2002. They've only had 2 cases, and that's all they've done this entire time. No, of course not. They've taken on many more issues. They've looked and done plenty of investigations. We've actually seen a lot through that. We're actually able to expose different leaders, show violations that have happened from that. It's not simply we've done 2 cases and that's it. No, we've got lots of investigation, lots of evidence that's come from that, and we've shown the world what's actually happening in Africa, what those real problems are. We've exposed those, and that's because of the International Criminal Court. We couldn't have that if it was without the International Criminal Court. So it's done more than just these 2 cases. Those 2 cases are doing great, but we've done so much more than that. So I want to talk a little bit more about the success of the International Criminal Court. First of all, I'd like to talk about warlords. So after warlord Thomas Lubanga was arrested for having child soldiers in his army, he was tried by the International Criminal Court, his popularity dropped just like that. So even if he wasn't fully tried, fully committed, they didn't finish that case. The aftermath of that was he actually lost his supporters. He lost his power in that sense, just by being arrested in the first place. That shows how impactful the International Criminal Court actually is. Also under that one, talk about Kenya. Kenya is one of the leading forces that is opposing the International Criminal Court. They're one of the leading voices saying that it's actually bad for Africa. However, if we look into it a little bit more, they came out with that statement after their president and vice president were tried for violations. And if you actually look at a very interesting trend, that according to the Human Rights Watch, essentially the main opponents of the International Criminal Courts are the ones that are under threat of prosecution. In a way that actually shows how successful it's being, showing that other countries that are feeling prosecuted, that know they're not doing the right things, are actually feeling threatened by this court. They're feeling pressured into understanding that what they're doing is wrong. That's becoming clear, that's becoming evident, both to them and to the world and to their neighbors. So with that, I'm going to yield for cross-examination. Thank you all for your time. I'm looking forward to Chip's next speech, extending on this a little bit more.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'm very happy to be here debating in front of you all. Before I start with my main argument, I just want to first start by taking some of their arguments and then we address them in the House so that we make sure that everyone in this room understands if ICC has really been good to Africa or if ICC is bad to Africa. So there are 3 main things that we agree with the opponents today, and then those are the main main objectives of ICC, which is to prosecute and then make sure that the perpetrators of crimes against humanity are held accountable, and then which is to make sure that we avoid future genocide and other crimes. And then, so the main thing now to analyze is, has ICC been able to deliver on those promises? And then again, has ICC been able to make sure that it implements all the needed things for it to achieve those promises? Now, they mentioned they talked about how the restorative justice, a justice that brings about peace and reconciliation after the perpetrator has been prosecuted, is not the main goal of ICC. But now, I want us to go back in research and look at some scholars who have studied about genocide and have given about the stages through which a nation has to go through for it to go back to a genocide. According to Alvin Stubb and Gregor Stoughton, they suggest that for a nation to go back to genocide, or for a nation to be likely to go back to genocide, there must to be past victimization. Or what I mean by past victimization, we must be having a group of people that has been victimized and then that feels like they were victimized, and then what does that mean? It means they have unhealed wounds and they're likely to revenge and go back to the same thing of killing other people who did bad to them. Now, what restorative justice does, it means that it removes that fact. It creates healed wounds. It heals the people who are victimized by the perpetrators that they're talking about. Now, for ICC, it has failed in the way, in their system, it has failed in the way they execute those people, because as ICC, as an organization that has been set and put in place to make sure that we don't have future crimes in Africa, it had to think, if we prosecute these people, is that the main job, to make sure that we don't have genocide in that country again? But the main job is, how can we also go forward, go ahead to make sure that we don't have another crime to happen in that country? So that's the part where restorative justice does something. And then African countries support the idea. I want to prove them wrong by the point they made that African countries support the ideas. In the last AU African Union Summit that took place in South Africa and took place in Rwanda, African leaders sat down and voted for and said that actually ICC is not doing well for us because it is used as a tool to manipulate our politics. I'll come back to that argument. Now, if African leaders, all of them, can sit together and decide that, what proves that it has been good and what shows that African countries are supporting it? Because in one of the resolutions of the AU summit that happened in Rwanda, even in South Africa, African leaders decided that ICC is not actually doing for us the work, but what we need to do, we need to create an African justice and human rights court that helps African countries to handle their own problems. Now, if leaders can go ahead and vote for something that does exactly what you do, just because they don't have the trust that you need to be having as an organization, and because they don't see your credibility as a strong organization. Now, I'll come back again to some of the arguments, but before I do that, I need to just give some of my arguments so that we can understand. Now, there is one thing that we need to understand. For any organization to achieve its main goals, we need to be having a designed system that matches with the purpose of the organization. But according to the status quo, ICC is no longer useful for the purposes from which it was designed. I'll prove it by my following point. So there are huge levels of skepticism and outright lack of trust by African leaders to the ICC. How does this been proved? They mentioned in one of the points that President of Sudan, Mohamed al-Bashir, has been charged by ICC. But now listen to the scenario that is happening. Mohamed al-Bashir goes to South Africa, is not prosecuted, is not arrested. Goes to Rwanda, is not arrested. Goes to different African countries, is not arrested. Why is that happening? Why can they arrest Mohamed al-Bashir? Because the system of ICC does not corroborate with the country, with the member states of ICC, so that the perpetrators can be arrested easily. Now, if ICC is good, it should be able to arrest perpetrators that they are talking about. Now, another thing is a tool to terrorize African countries that European countries take to be disobedient. Now, if you are to go in all the cases that they're going to talk about, ICC has been able to charge, 10 of them are on the African ground. Yes. Maybe we might say that Africa is a shithole country, is a continent of shithole countries. But the question is, if 10 of the criminal cases the ICC has been able to judge are from Africa, does it mean that the rest of the world is at peace? Does it mean that Venezuela is at peace? Does it mean that Burma is at peace? Does it mean that Colombia is at peace? Does it mean that what happened to Iraq was right? Does it mean that what is happening in Syria is right? Does it mean that what happened in Afghanistan is right? It is not right. But ICC is being used as a tool for European countries to manipulate the African politics, to make sure that they arrest those countries that European countries consider to be having strategic interest in. Like, for instance, what happened in Rwanda in 1994. The President of the United States said that they cannot intervene in a country where they do not have strategic interest. And then the same thing that is happening in ICC. They are not intervening in cases that happened in existence of ICC. Thank you. I'll come back in my last speech.
Audience ready? All right, let's begin. Since this is my first speech, I'll go ahead and issue a blanket of thanks to my audience, to my opponent, and my partner. With that being said, I'll dive right in. I'll go into some of my case, and then along the way, you'll probably see how it touches on their case. That being said, the first thing I'd like to bring up is the limited jurisdiction of the ICC. My opponent wants to talk about all these times that the ICC should have intervened, all these things that it should have done, but the ICC has a very limited jurisdiction. The ICC only has jurisdiction over countries within the ICC. He talks about Iraq. Iraq isn't in the ICC. So what we see here is that the only way the ICC can actually intervene is with countries that are in the ICC. So I don't know why my opponent wants to talk about countries that aren't in the ICC, because they're not really relevant for this round. I'd like to point out also that 30 of the countries that are in the ICC are from Africa. So it's not a tool of European imperialism. No, it's African countries holding each other accountable. So in fact, it's anti-imperialism, because it's saying African countries are taking responsibility for their own actions as opposed to, being dictated to by the United States, who, for example, is not in the ICC. So the United States, actually, it's funny, the United States is not in the ICC because it's worried it might be prosecuted. So I'm not really sure how that means it's a tool, how it could possibly be a tool of the West against Africa, if that's a specific reason why the United States doesn't want to be in the ICC. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the failed, my opponent talks about the failed justice. I'd like to point out that regardless of whether or not it successfully prosecutes, we can see under the example that my partner brought up that even when they're not getting prosecuted, the people that they're prosecuting, that they're trying to prosecute, even when they're not convicted, they still lose popularity. I'd like to emphasize that in this round, because even when they're not successful, it still makes them less popular. It still makes them less effective at committing war crimes. The person that my friend brought up was having child soldiers. Once people started opposing him, he wasn't able really to get child soldiers. So that's saying even when it's not getting everything it needs to be done, it's still being successful. It's still being good for Africa. And I'd like to point out that my opponent talks about the two cases. I'd like to point out that those two cases still were better for Africa than the world in which the ICC didn't exist. In a world where the ICC did not exist, those two people would not have been prosecuted. So I can't really say how it's been bad for Africa, because what my opponent has to do is say that in the world without the ICC would be better than the world with the ICC. So the ICC may not be perfect. It may not get everything done it says it's supposed to, but the question today is whether or not the ICC is on balance good or bad for Africa. So just because it's not always successful doesn't mean that it's bad for Africa. With the rest of my time, I'd like to go back to the limited jurisdiction point. Once again, the United States, who is probably the most prosperous, one of the more imperialist countries in the world, it can't do anything with the ICC. So I don't know how, once again, I'd like to say that it's literally impossible for it to be a tool of Western imperialism, because the only countries that can actually prosecute within the ICC are countries that are in it. And something I'd like to point out is literally the lead prosecutor of the ICC is an African. So if someone that is an African person that obviously cares about Africa, over a fourth of the judges on the ICC are from Africa. With all that said, I don't really know how it could be anti-Africa, how it could be bad for Africa to have the ICC in existence. With that being said, I will allow my opponent to.
All right, great. Is my opponent ready? My partner ready? My moderator ready? Sure. And my audience ready? Okay, with that, let's begin. This is the last time you'll be hearing from me, so I do want to thank all of you for coming out, spending your evening with us. We've really enjoyed this. I know Chip and I are so happy to have this round, happy to have our opponents here. We're just really thankful for this. So since this is our speech to start doing refutations, I'm really just going to focus on rebuttals, things that have come up before, and really show why you should still be voting negative today, and just talk on some different points. So first thing I want to talk about is this purpose. My opponents say that the ICC is failing because they're not meeting its purpose. However, in cross-sects, you'll remember that I mentioned 4 purposes. Purpose of persecuting, being a last resort, having accountability, and national judiciary. We as the negative can admit that maybe they're not persecuting as to the rate that we'd like. Maybe it's not as fast or as efficient as we want. However, it's still meeting 3 of its other goals. So 3 out of 4 ain't bad. So right now it's still being successful as being a last resort. My opponents actually conceded that in their last speech. So they talked about Rwanda actually handled this stuff themselves. That's great. ICC is all 4 other countries like having their own judiciary, setting up, working out well. That's really great. But when that doesn't happen, when other countries don't have that infrastructure set up, don't have that its institutions ready, the funds, the ICC can step in and help out. So it's a fail-safe, if you will. It's not being imperialistic. It's not coming in wiping out these local governments such as Rwanda. It's just there as a backup, just in case. That's why it's good for Africa, that has this fail-safe, that has this background, this accountability, just in case your own local government can't quite handle it just yet. This is a stepping stone for you all to get there in time. So next thing we'll talk about is moving on to this restorative justice. They bring up that simply because they can't fix everything, that it's failing. But that's not quite true, because remember they said that's not the sole purpose, that's not the sole reason here. And talking about removing wounds. However, without the ICC, there really wouldn't be a chance of that. It would be a lot harder to have complete restorative justice without this international body there to watch over everything and keep it standard. You wouldn't be able to have those wounds healed, have countries working together after that if you didn't have this body over them working together. I want to move on about credibility. They've talked about skepticism and credibility of the ICC, but we have a response from that from Mr. Annan, who is a former UN Secretary General. He says that the ICC remains the continent's most credible court for serious crimes. So we have other leaders actually saying, hey, this is a really credible thing. We like it. Let's keep it around. Moving on to leaders a little bit more. They mentioned that none of the leaders like this. They voted it down. However, that's also not true. Consider the point of some African leaders in a group called the Elders. The Elders are a group of global leaders actually created by Nelson Mandela, putting that together after apartheid. They actually said they are in strong support of this ICC. They're really happy about it because it's really helping countries work together and fix these problems. So because of that, we've extended all these cases. I really want you to consider, on balance, is the ICC working? Would you rather be in an Africa that does have it or doesn't have it? So with that, I want to thank you all very much. Thank you so much for coming out for this debate. We strongly urge you to vote negative on this round. Thank you.
All right, so I'm happy to be back again, and I'm just going to give a rebuttal speech showing you guys what we said and what they said, and if both arguments favor our side. So basically, the whole topic today was whether or not the ICC has done more harm than good to Africa. I'll first elaborate on what we said and what they said. Now, first of all, I hope you've noticed that in this debate, we've agreed on the main aims of ICC, which is making sure that perpetrators of human crimes, can be genocide crime, any human crime, are held accountable, and then also to deliver justice, right? And then, which is one thing we agreed. Now, the next thing was to prove whether it has been able to hold the perpetrators of certain crimes accountable, especially African perpetrators. Now, we say that the ICC has completely failed to deliver on its promise of justice. We have an example of Joseph Kony. Joseph Kony was a liberal terrorist in Uganda, and then he was tried in ICC, but later on he was let free. And then he was let free, yet he was supposed to be persecuted for his crimes and arrested. Omar al-Bashir is currently moving around with all the crimes that are held against him. Now, basically what ICC does is to bring all the perpetrators of certain crimes in the room, try them, and then let them free. Now, how exactly is that delivering to his promise of justice, which it had promised in first place, and which is why African countries have decided to go for it? In the sense that African countries joined the ICC with the hope that the ICC would be able to solve the certain solutions and certain problems that it was not able to have. Due to the little resources that certain African countries have, they joined the ICC hoping that the ICC would deliver accurate justice, but it has failed by letting such leaders free. Again, what the ICC simply does, and this is why our negative is blinded today, our negative is blinded by an ICC that basically passes a law like, well, you should all go to school, but again, doesn't provide school. It tries out leaders in the room, but at the end of the day, sets them free. It doesn't make any sense. And then they also talked about that the ICC does not persecute at the rate that we want. Now, and then my question was, the ICC has only tried 2 cases for its 11 years that it has been on power. And then the ICC has a budget of 140 million euros. That's a lot of money. And it has about 900 staff. So what is the main reason as to why it's not trying out as many cases as it should? It has the right money for that. It has the right stuff for that. It has everything adequate and fit for it to be able to solve all the cases that it should solve. So why can't it try, persecute, and then solve as many cases as it can? Because then now, Africans who had trusted the ICC so much with their own leaders are being disappointed because their leaders are just tried in the room and then set free to continue their bad actions, which again does not help in any way. Now, we have advocated for that because we believe that the ICC has, again, done more harm than good. The ICC has just manipulated African leaders in the sense that it has only brought the perpetrators of them in the room, but has not tried them and does not held them accountable for their actions, which is the main goal as to why it is. So end of it all, the ICC has disappointed Africa, therefore it is bad for Africa. Thank you.
Ready? Opponents ready? Moderator ready? Okay. With that being said, I'll dive right in. So since this is the final speech the negative will present today, I'd like to issue another blanket of thanks to the audience here, the moderator, my opponents, and my partner. That being said, I'll dive right in to see why you should definitely be voting negative in this round. The first reason you should vote for the negative is fundamentally what this round's about, whether or not the ICC is bad for Africa. The negative is not you're saying the ICC is perfect. The negative is simply saying that it's been good. It's not perfect, it's not great, just good. The ICC is not 100% successful. That does not mean it's failing. That does not mean it's bad. What we have to do is we have to look at a world where we look at the affirmative world. The affirmative world is a world where the ICC does not exist. And so if we look at that world versus the negative world where the ICC does exist, whether or not it's good for Africa. And I think you can see so far in this round that it would be bad for Africa if the ICC did not exist. Therefore, the negative is proven true. With that being said, the second reason you should vote for the negative today is the popularity. We can see through the examples that we've provided that the popularity of leaders who are prosecuted by the ICC, regardless of how successfully they're prosecuted, drops. They become unpopular. They can't fight with anyone. They fight with people turn against them. So we see that's what happens in a world where the ICC exists. The third reason you should vote for the negative today is the purpose. First of all, I'd like to point out the affirmative has only provided a reason why they failed to meet one of their 4 purposes. The 3 that they haven't shown is that they haven't shown the ICC hasn't become a court of last resort. They haven't shown that there is no accountability, and they haven't shown that basically in a world without the ICC, the national judiciary wouldn't be protected, which is sort of the goal of the ICC. It's to ensure that if and only if your own country can't get it done, then the ICC steps in. That's the only time it steps in. The fourth reason to vote for the negative today, it's not imperialist. It's not manipulated. African countries are bringing these suits against other African countries to show accountability, which goes right into the purpose. The fifth reason to vote for the negative today is the opposition is based on success. This shows the ICC creates credibility. The example we provided was of the Kenyan president who's opposed to it because he's being prosecuted by the ICC. So this shows fundamentally that the only reason that people are opposed to the ICC is in fact that it actually is successful, that it is prosecuting people and making them lose power, which is what my opponent wants to make the debate about. So with that being said, let's look back at the reasons you should vote negative today. We don't have to prove it's perfect. We just have to prove it's more good than bad. And I think we have done that today. The second reason you should vote for the negative is the popularity, how it decreases the popularity of bad leaders, bad actors in Africa, how that makes it good for Africa. The third reason is to vote for based on purpose. The only thing the affirmative has even shown at all is that it's failed to meet one of its 4 purposes, so 3 out of 4 ain't bad, as my partner so eloquently said. And the fourth reason to vote for the negative today is it's not imperialist, it's not manipulated. And the fifth reason is the opposition to it is based only on success. Thank you.
Wow, I feel good to give the last speech. I'm going to just try to make sure that the House understands exactly why we believe that the affirmative has been able to prove that ICC has not been good and is not good for Africa. So we made an argument saying that African leaders have voted for some resolutions that are out of the line with what ICC stands for and what ICC believes in, which is like voting for the immunity from persecution, voting for the African Human Right and African Human Right and Justice Court, which is the opposite of the ICC, which makes ICC not valuable to Africa. So what they had to do here is to prove the clarity, to prove that ICC with the availability or in the presence of those resolutions, ICC still stands as a good thing for Africa. They failed to do that. And then they say that the end goal, we say that we have to prove that the end goal of justice is to make sure that the perpetrators are held accountable. And how is someone held accountable? Is to make sure that they are charged things that like equivalent to what they did. And with all the charges they gave, with all the cases they gave, they failed to show a finished case whereby maybe giving us an example that Mohamed al-Bashir has been arrested with all the countries that he visited. They had to prove that the case they gave of any country they mentioned has been finished, and they failed to do that. So they failed to show how popularity can stop the leaders from doing whatever they intend to do as long as they're still in power. They failed to do it. We gave an example of Mohamed al-Bashir, though he's still in power, even if they claim that his popularity has decreased, but then they failed to show how he can stop to do anything he wants as long as he's still in power. He still has the institutions and everything. And then their main thing is that we failed to show how ICC does not have accountability, but now it comes back again. If you cannot finish your cases, if you cannot arrest people, you say that they're perpetrators, how are you accountable? How are you credible as an organization that stands to create peace and stop crimes that are happening in Africa? And then they failed to explain what makes an African case so sweet for ICC to intervene, but failed to intervene in Iraq. Yes, yet both countries are not members of the ICC. They gave an example of whereby they say that Iraq is not part of the ICC, so ICC cannot intervene. But we say that ICC intervened in Sudan, but what makes Sudan so special that ICC has to intervene and then they cannot intervene in Iraq, which means that proves that their failure to prove that makes the argument we made about ICC being biased on Africa credible, because they failed to show how those two cases are different. Now, another thing that we had to make sure is that if ICC cannot keep the reputation of African countries by making sure that African countries are treated on the same table like the same other countries that are member states of ICC, how can you say that ICC has been good to Africa if it cannot keep its reputation as a nation that has issues that other countries have? Thank you.